5 big monster movies that you would have seen before King of the Monsters. Brought after. Here we go. The Black Scorpion, the Deadly Mantis, Titanic Woman, the Amazing Colossal Man, the Giant Claw, Rodan, Gigantis, the Cyclops, Giant Great Demons, the Monster Challenge the World, the Giant Gila Monster, Gorgo, 20 million monster, the very the unbelievable. Give some love to that guy. There you go. That's all I need.
Hello and welcome to Camp Kaiju Monster Movie Podcast. We're your hosts, Vincent, Hannam,
and Matt Levine.
And we're talking about all our favorite monster movies, the good, the bad, and the downright campy, and asking if they stand the test of time.
Traditional kaiju, creature features, space invaders, the supernatural, and everything in between. All strange beasts welcome here.
And listeners, do you want to bring a brick-and-mortar video store back to Minneapolis? Well, the Video Store Minneapolis is trying to do just that. They are a volunteer-run nonprofit with a mission to preserve physical copies of every movie and TV series they can find, create a library of those titles, and make that library available to the people in their community. In the before times, a place like this was called a video store. And it's time to make one real again. The Video Store Minneapolis' 30-day online fundraiser for a brick-and-mortar space launches August 1st, 2026. Give if you can. Go to the Video Store, MPLS.org for more. That and other information linked in the show notes. This episode is about not just Godzilla King of the Monsters from 1956, but it's a very deep dive and a very specific angle, namely how the director and editor of the film, Terrio Morse, along with actor Raymond Burr and producer Joseph E. Levine, actually maybe arguably build on the original Toho 1954 Godzilla by adding their film noir and crime sensibilities that kind of enhance, highlight, color those sensibilities that are, again, arguably already in the original picture. So I'm really proud. I think it's a really cool take. I get to talk about film noir, probably my second favorite movie genre after monsters and kaiju. So that's great. Even better than that, though, is when Beth takes the mic and she goes into film theory and the cinematic language of those techniques again. And she is so proud and so honored to be announcing for the very first time as of G-Fest 2026, newly published material, photographs related to actor Amy Iwanabe. She plays Emiko in the American footage of Godzilla King of the Monsters. So up until this point, she was unknown. Her identity was unknown. Beth has done a lot of academic digging and connected with the family. Thank you all.
Godzilla, King of the Monsters, alive, surging up from the depths of the sea on a tidal wave of terror to wreak vengeance on mankind.
Godzilla, King of the Monsters, it's alive!
A gigantic beast,
Stalking the earth, crushing all before it.
in a cyclonic cavalcade of electrifying horror.
Raging through the streets on a rampage of total destruction.
Godzilla, King of the Monsters,
Incredible titan of terror.
wiping out a city of 6 million in a holocaust of flame.
Jet planes cannot destroy it.
Bombs cannot kill it.
All modern weapons fail.
Is this the end of our civilization?
Can the scientists of the world find a way to stop this creature?
For the answer, see Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
You may wish to deny it, but your eyes tell you it's true.
A tale to stun the mind.
More fantastic than any ever written by Jules Verne.
More terrifying than any ever shown on the screen.
Awesome.
Incredible.
Unbelievable.
A story beyond your wildest dreams.
Dynamic violence.
Savage action.
Spectacular thrill.
Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
Fantastic beyond comprehension.
Gripping beyond compare.
Astounding beyond belief.
The mightiest monster of them all.
See Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
Adventure and excitement to stagger the imagination. The fantastic fire monsters raging out of the flaming bowels of hell. Mighty Gigantis crushing whole cities in its wrath. And deadly Anguirus screaming its challenge of mortal combat. The battle of the ages. Scenes and sights and sensations beyond anything the screen has ever shown.
Is a skyscraper. When he moves, the whole earth quivers and quakes, and an abyss of horror opens up. See these prehistoric beasts emerge from the bowels of the earth after 200 million years to devastate mankind. Supersonic jets cannot catch him. Rockets cannot stop him. Armored tanks are helpless before him. Even guided missiles are powerless. See Rodan destroy a modern city, leveling it to the earth with a killing airstream of his mighty wings. Nothing can stop him. Nothing escapes this monstrous beast of evil.
Just got to let you know what you're in for a little bit. This Kaiju 2026, I'm releasing the special panel presentations that I presented with Beth Bredlau and Chris McVillain and Ed Godziszewski. And this week you're going to be listening to me and Beth. And this was Beth's idea. These are all her ideas. She submitted them to the powers that be at G-Fest, and they said, yes, let's do that. And then later on, Beth invited me to the party. Hey, special thanks to our patrons, Jason, Chris, Sean, Peggy, our anonymous patron, Don, Steffi, Jim, Cheney, and Ben. Thank you for making this possible. And to our anonymous patron, thanks for being there. Your question is featured at the end. Folks, if you enjoy listening to Camp Kaiju, leave us a rating and review. Positive ratings and review go a really long way. Follow us on patreon.com/Camp Kaiju. Get in touch with us at campkaiju@gmail.com, campkaijupodcast.com, Instagram, and leave a voicemail in the answering machine zone at 612-470-2612. And then after this episode, next weekend, I'm coming back at you with part 2 of the panel called Is It a Kaiju? And then after that, we're coming at you, me and Matt. Matt returns. We're going to close out the first half of 2026 with King Kong Escapes building on our interview with Linda Miller, me and Matt just do our great deep dives into the production history and all the ins and outs of King Kong Escapes.
Hello, my name is Beth Bredlau. I am affectionately considered the Godzilla scholar. I'm getting my PhD at the IU Media School in Godzilla, and this is actually a presentation of my master's thesis that I just did, and towards the end, I will be talking about and releasing unpublished information on the actress. I was lucky enough that through back channels, I talked to Steve Rifle, and he connected me with the family, and I now have her biography and her story and her filmography, and at 1 o'clock, probably right now, the Kaiju papers have also officially released the article. So for the first time, we get to talk about the woman in the film, Amy Iwanabe. So how the presentation is going to go, we're going to give some context from the film. Vince is going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to do a little bit of an analysis of my master's. I promise I won't get too technical, unless you guys really want to get into 4D and the cons and the stance. Okay, that'll get into the unpublished information.
That's fantastic. The Kaiju papers, if you follow them on Instagram, you get to stay on top of that really exciting news. Beth is going to really drill down, like I said. I'm going to provide a lot of context for the film King of the Monsters specifically, and just kind of tee it up for Beth, the latter half of this presentation. My name is Vincent. I'm the producer and co-host of the Camp Kaiju Monster Movie podcast. We've been going on 6 years now, close to 200 episodes. We talk about kaiju and creature features and everything in between. I'm also a playwright of sci-fi and horror stories back in theater and storytelling. So last thing before we get into it, I just got to say Mothra, Gamera, and McVillain are my favorite kaiju, apart from Godzilla. As you can see right there. All right. Well, okay, so what is this movie, Godzilla, King of the Monsters? No, not that one. Who put that in there? Not me. There we go, that's it. Godzilla, King of the Monsters from 1956. Now raise your hand if you've seen this Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Excellent. I was also into too, so you're in for a little class here. All right, raise your hand if you love this movie. Unabashedly top tier. Yes, that's great. I'm curious though, you just like it? Raise your hand if you're like, it's okay. Perfect. No right or wrong answers here. Raise your hand if you do not like it. There's no judgment, no shame, no blame. Cool. Anyone just kind of like it? Yeah, like. All right.
Yeah, it's not my favorite Godzilla movie.
Totally.
Yeah.
I'm ready to change your mind.
All right, well, however you feel about Godzilla, King of the Monsters, let's provide a little context. Okay, so this movie, in the presentation, you'll see it abbreviated GKOTM, but I will just say King of the Monsters. It was released in 1956. It is the Americanized version of Godzilla, released in 1954 in Japan, Toho Studios, Shirohama. The Japanese version, however, was obscure in the United States until the early 21st century. I remember getting the DVD in 2004 and thinking, oh, this is a big deal. Wild to think about. But practically speaking, for close to 50 years, King of the Monsters, however you feel about it now, love it or hate it, it was the image, the film that seared itself into our collective consciousness in this country in the West. However, when 1954's Godzilla comes out on home media, views on King of the Monsters begin to change a little bit because now we can compare and contrast, which is a wonderful thing. King of the Monsters, love or hate it, the reputation starting to change a little bit compared to Honda's original. Loading. There's a GIF in here, that's why I think it's taken a little bit of time. Yeah, but some common critiques of Godzilla King of the Monsters, just get it all out there. And some of those common critiques we hear about on Reddit boards and other more academic papers are it waters down the theme of nuclear anxiety in Honda's 54 Godzilla, making for an easier American reception. There's a whole lot more to that, but that's for another panel. But we will continue these common critiques. This film does feature a lot of dubbing effects, which some argue take away and ruin the more serious tone of the original film. Godzilla King of the Monsters whitewashes the Japanese film with the inclusion of a white American male as the protagonist. King of the Monsters is another run-of-the-mill monster movie, again losing or maybe some of that poignancy from the original. We are not here to argue with these critiques. I think we think these are valid critiques, so we're not here to do that. And I'll say more about that in a second. But what are some positives, then, of King of the Monsters? It did introduce, Japanese cinema to Western audiences en masse. It did establish Godzilla as the worldwide pop culture icon we know. And it, technically speaking, features a lot of editing techniques that seamlessly insert new footage into the original version. And the storytelling devices that bring a sense of escapism to the original's more overtly poignant messaging. Maybe that's not your cup of tea, but maybe it is. It's kind of like a -1 versus Monsterverse. But, no wrong answers here. But what we'll say is, together we're going to analyze the positives. Not to argue that King of the Monsters is a better film than Godzilla, but that King of the Monsters deserves its own praise for achievements in editing and performance. Elements that arguably build on the original story and legacy more than detract from it. The common argument is it ruins Honda's. Well, maybe it enhances it a little bit, and that's kind of the angle we challenge you to accept and flip the script a little bit in how you're looking at this Americanized version. All right, central to this discussion will be director and editor Terry O'Morse. Boom. Actor Raymond Berg. Boom. And producer Joseph E. Levine, and even cinematic language of film noir. Yeah, now talk about some non-monster movies. What? We're going to start with Joseph Levine. He was a producer, distributor, and marketing mogul, best known for The Graduate, The Producers, The Lion in Winter, A Bridge Too Far, Academy Award-winning movies. This was the producer of the American Godzilla film. So, maybe a little pedigree we weren't considering before. But before King of the Monsters, Levine also promoted foreign films called art house films, and he took this stuff seriously. He wanted to introduce these foreign films to American audiences. Some early Italian classics like The Bicycle Thieves, he brought to the States. Levine did. They were all dubbed, for better or for worse, but again, maybe for better, it introduced these films to wider audiences. So, again, building the box office and cultural success, you could argue. Now, as for Japanese films, in the West, in the United States, it really starts with Rashomon. Levine did not distribute this one, but Rashomon did open the door for Western distributors to say, okay, Japanese cinema could be worthy of bringing over to our audiences. And then, to tie it into science fiction, Destination Moon comes out in 1950, and it ushers in the atomic age sci-fi craze of the 50s. Levine is the guy who, we're saying, brings us together. He looks at Japanese cinema, he looks at science fiction, he says, let's bring Godzilla as kind of a combination of the two over. Just a quick reminder, we're talking about all this in hindsight. It's good to know that even with the success of international films in the 50s in America, they were still very obscure. Nobody was really still seeing these relatively. Godzilla King of the Monsters changes that. It's a huge success considering the Levine's mark he adds in the dubbing, the trimming. He did cut time to fit on double bills with other pictures and inserting new scenes and characters. Considering his reputation as a champion of foreign films, we're here to say, to posit that maybe his intention was not to exploit the film for negative reasons. It was, again, to champion the film as a product of Japanese cinema. Question for the class, just think about it. Does good intent justify editing an artist's original work? because ultimately, even with Togo's blessing, that is what happened. And another panel that for later. Okay. Just want to check the time.
You're good.
Okay, thank you. On that note, okay, one. Since we're at the greatest Kaiju convention ever, I do want to talk about some other giant monster movies that preceded King of the Monsters. So if you're a 1950s teenager and you're like, let's go check out King of the Monsters, it wasn't entirely new, like the concept of a kaiju, but it kind of was new. And for this quick aside, we're going to focus on the early 50s. So sorry, fans of The Lost World and Mike Joe Young, but we're going to feature Atomic Age giant monsters. King Kong, yes, but it was re-released in 1952, kick-starting the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Both of these movies influenced Tomy Tanaka, Tony Make, Godzilla, and the same year Godzilla came out in 54, you met them as well. Okay, giant gorillas, dinosaurs, ants. Two other movies in 1955, Came From Beneath the Sea, and Tarantula. So there's 5 big monster movies that you would have seen before King of the Monsters. Brought after. Well, here we go. The Black Scorpion, the Deadly Mantis, Technically Woman, the Amazing Colossal Man, the Giant Claw, Rodan, Gigantis, the Cyclops, Giant Behemoth, the Monster that challenges the world, that giant Gila monster, Gorgo, 20 million monster, the very unbelievable. Give some love to that guy. And so many more. That's just the 50s, including Japanese or Americanized cuts of these Japanese Honda films. And the 60s obviously would just go above and beyond. So, just on paper, you can see the pre-Godzilla King of the Monsters, post. I had a lot of fun putting this slide together. But what about film noir? This kind of is the crux of the editing and technical aspects that we think really define King of the Monsters. Okay, I'm going to read these real quick. Definitions of film noir: stylized genre of film marked by pessimism, fatalism, and cynicism. Film noir literally translates to black cinema, and French critics used it to describe Hollywood movies that were saturated with darkness and pessimism not seen before. Film noir itself is very closely related to the earlier tradition of German expressionism from the 20s. European emigres brought these traditions over to Hollywood. The noir ambiance is dominated by feelings of disorientation, loneliness, and entrapment. Common traits, just think, do any of these click when you're thinking about Godzilla, the 54 movie? Tough guys and anti-heroes, femme fatales, concise dialogue, low-key, high contrast, lighted and deep shadows, post-war disillusionment, voiceover narration. The original Godzilla shared some of these traits. Dr. Serizawa is arguably an anti-hero. The shadows in this movie are gorgeous, very inky black cinematography, and it's all about post-war disillusionment. Well, Godzilla King of the Monsters builds on this. Director Terry Morse, producer Joseph Levine, they add voiceover narration, and they cast Raymond Burr, who at this time was known for his tough guy noir crime roles. Creative choices that may seem to detract, but again, maybe they add, enhance, augment Honda's sensibilities. Joseph Levine. Career, 1927 as an editor. He was really well known as a director. He worked in the B movies, best known today for King of the Monsters. Beth's going to have a lot more to say about those specific editing techniques that Terry Morse really implemented in his work. Raymond Burr, the actor cast to convey Morse's film noir sensibilities. He was known for his crime dramas, and he often played tough guys and criminals. Better known credits in the crime film noir genre include San Quentin, The Blue Gardenia, Crying at Night, and of course, Rear Window, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Burr plays the antagonist, villainous guy, talks up a lie in the garden. Check it out if you haven't seen it. But then after Godzilla King of the Monsters, Burr kind of becomes an outright star in a crime drama. Perry Mason, for which he won 2 Emmy Awards for Outstanding Lead Actor. So, Godzilla King of the Monsters, I just want to make the point, not just some cheapy exploitative film. There was real talent behind this production, in acting, in directing and editing, especially. And the producer himself, was making sure to do right, as much as possible, considering the modifications he was making to the essence of the original film. Burr also reprised his role later in Godzilla 1985, an American recut of the return of Godzilla. So the production powers that be said, it worked really well for King of the Monsters, let's do it again. And they recut, going back to the 50s, Rodan and Varan, and Godzilla Raids Again became Gigantis. So the techniques employed by Morse and Levine, they kept working for other films. Okay. Therefore, we can reasonably counter these comic critiques. Not saying that these critiques are wrong, I think they are valid. But if you're in a conversation, you could say, while King of the Monsters might water down these themes, you could say, well, Morse and Burr reframed the themes of nuclear anxiety through an American lens, equally capturing Honda's sense of post-war disillusionment, but through more overt film noir techniques. The delving effects ruin the serious tone of the film? Maybe, but maybe it's worth saying that Levine's choice broadens the market and does help ensure the legacy of a film that he himself took seriously. The whitewashing, a valid argument, but also keep in mind that Levine casts Raymond Burr, as a conduit for the audience to engender empathy for the Japanese story in this post-war World War II landscape where a lot of Americans were still, they fought the Japanese not 10 years earlier. So I think it's important to bridge that gap a little bit. And then Godzilla King of the Monsters, maybe a run-of-the-mill picture. It's still a lot more memorable, even with Levine's edits, than a lot of those other giant monster movies that we went over. So we could say that while Godzilla King of the Monsters modifies the original, it does so with respect, and Godzilla King of the Monsters enhances the appeal, builds on the success, and ensures the legacy of Godzilla. Part 2.
Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, central to my research question when I went ahead and I pitched this idea to a very traditional art history discipline board that I wanted to do this film as my master's, was to really examine the hard question of how did Godzilla become King of the Monsters? So much of our scholarship examines the what and the end product. But so much of this subject construction is an active subject making process that you have the audience immersed and engaged with repeatedly to reconnect in to make this effective. And the thing about this is all invisible post-film editing. This is a thing that, as an audience, you're not going to see because the point is you don't, because it works effectively. You're engaged in immersive film. Think of the last film that you watched that was so good. You lost time. You were in the conversations. All that is done through calculating post-film editing, done through cinematic codes that have been studied since 1910 to make that possible. So part of my research, I'm trying to figure out how effortlessly in the West did we just accept Godzilla's King of the Monsters? It comes from this. So the answer of how Godzilla became King of the Monsters is the film editing constructed subjectivity tailored to 1950s Western audiences. That's the answer. So what we're going to do is by isolating the footage Morse adds into film, and then we're going to analyze it using the practical mechanisms of suture film theory. And I will get all into this. It's a little technical. I'm going to go slow. It's going to reveal the invisible hand of editing but also its intertextuality to other films in the 1950s that 1950s audiences would have possibly picked up on to enjoy the film. Okay, what is suture film theory? We're gonna brevity, broad strokes this project. So it's basically the idea of how film immerses audiences into it. How the viewer is metaphorically stitched into the narrative through subject identification. And at this point, it is Rainbow. This means how we, the audience, are identifying and enjoying this point of view in a way that's natural. So it also has to satisfy these subconscious gaps. So how it's doing it is constructing conversations that then one person is talking, you see their view, and it's going back and forth. So it's actually the way the shots are sequencing, are constructing conversations that you need as a viewer to be able to get these identifications. And it's something that you don't even realize is happening because it has been studied since the 1910s and in all of our films within classic Hollywood continuity that have trained us in the West to know to do this. And again, this is really all invisible. Questions of Cinema by Stephen Heath, I think, is one of the best books on the subject. It's a little complicated, but if you stick with it, it really will lay out how film, particularly classic Hollywood film, has trained us into ways of looking, and how this is done is through pattern of shot edits that we don't even see. So these mechanisms, there's two parts of it. You have the Freudian, Lacanian semiotics of, going deep into audience subjectivity, which we're not going to do. But instead, I'm going to talk about the practical parts of it, which is these codes and how cinema is constructed that is operationalizing the theory. Okay, I mean, maybe next year I'll come back and we'll have a big sinology discussion. But it is the psychoanalytic construction. So when you hear a lot of discussion on the film about, this Western gaze, that again is the end product of, that is the theorizing of it. But to get there are these operations. So let me get into it. This is a really great model I found from Beverly Boy that again is good at laying this out. It's this metaphor of our psychoanalytic engagement film done through invisible codes that make us go into this reality seamlessly. Okay, so let's really get into it. We're going to get right to the beginning of the film. So this is one of my favorite sequences because from the beginning, what we are doing is being sutured into this film effortlessly. So as you can see on the far left, we have the gift, and we have this constructed conversation between them, and it is happening in real space and time. We are seeing, Steve Martin talking to Emiko. We also, if you continue to look, their outlines are actually connected. So what is happening, there's this idea of the 180 plane, okay? So you have a conversation and you have a camera, and it's going back and forth, and it's constructing the conversation. And you need that to construct these point of view shots. Again, this is about seeing continuity. Because if you don't have that, then the conversation doesn't come off naturally, So say we're sitting here talking, we're going to construct this cinematically. I look at Vince. Vince is going to look back at me, and that's going to be the conversation, and the camera's going to be right here. And that's how you do it. So take a look at the way shots are set up. This is the shot, reverse shot sequence. In shot, reverse shot sequence, the cinematic trick that came out, particularly within the 1930s, and it became the blueprint of how you make conversations relatable and natural in film. So we immediately see this. We immediately see that Morris is constructing these conversations effortlessly. And we know this because also at the time, there was even reviews that said, I can't believe Raymond Burr was in this movie. They didn't even know, but it's these kind of sequences that go back and forth. And I know you're going to say, well, yeah, but the dubbing and the voice, it doesn't match up and all these other things. But we also have real-time digenists and realists in this. They are looking at each other, they are doing this. And so the suture operations are happening, being constructed here. Whether or not we can look back on it within 2026 and see the faults, but that's also because we know these are two films. They didn't know that in the 90s. So this is how we are being also immersed within the story, because it's these sequences that now we know, oh, Raymond Burr. We are now following Raymond Burr through this story. And I think that this is another really great part of the film that was really sticking out to me when I was trying to figure out how the editing was going back and forth. And it is this Odo Island scene. So let me break down what I mean by these technical action match shots. So on the left, we have Honda's footage. We see Emiko. She sees, Godzilla. She starts running. She falls. We go back. And what does Okada do? Pick her up. But then we have the Morse footage. And it's doing the exact same thing in this sequence. But what's also happening is it's also going back to the same shot of the Honda footage. So now Terrio Morse has been able to stitch in this footage by matching the footage of Honda and then going back to the same reaction point. So as we're watching this, we're not even questioning that Emiko has reacted to this, and also Steve Martin has as well. Because again, it's these film editing within this continuity of space and time that's placing all the characters together to have these conversations. And this is called action match. And also too, I just say, when I was looking at this, there is such dedication to look at the way the lighting is matching. Look at the way that the scenery is matching. And these are all construction. So again, we have this scare to make these shots complement and match each other. And particularly as a film editor, he sat there in the room by himself, watching this film on reel, going through each of the scales to see what they look like. And he was the film doctor, so that meant, how do I make this look seamless, even study these shots? And look, he's absolutely matching them and mirroring them. So again, it's these continuity tricks that are placing all of this together. But unless you isolate the footage and then you build off it with your analysis, you kind of miss that it's doing that. And another real good cinematic trick that I noticed that he was doing, and another element of feature film theory, is dialogue. Remember how I talked about that absence earlier, about how the next shot almost has to satisfy the shot that we need and how we need to go back and forth? Well, these metaphorical absences also relate to your knowledge. And in the 1950s, what did the American audience not know? Japanese. They didn't know Japanese, right? So, again, we have these translation footage that's actually just doing, again, these acts of suture in the audience is. Because what is Steve Martin doing? It's matching them on the footage. He walks in, he goes to the translator, and he says, what are we saying? And then it's recapped back, because the footage is going back and forth, because the scene is also not the untranslated Japanese. So we're walking, we're cut to on the footage, it's untranslated, and then it cuts back and says, what was that? What are you saying? So now we have these absences that are keeping us audience engaged with it as well, because it's also believable that remember and Steve Martin will know Japanese. And that part of the film, did we ever think Steve Martin knew Japanese? So again, it's these other little dialogue tricks that, while pacing, scene, and novelist are actually doing again this deep subconscious immersion with the film, that with the 1950s are connecting with the Western audiences to make this community effect. Yeah, I really like this, and particularly too. There's a review that I got from IndianaG-Fest in 1957, a review from this movie, that they talked about the cigarette as this narrative. So the Japanese reviewers, because when they saw this film in Japan, because they went to Japan, that was the first thing they mentioned, that they knew,
and they were going to get internal dialogues because of them smoking. So that became a device that the Japanese then picked up on as well. That's again another film, noir motif. But what I love about this was, again, thinking of the idea of secret, thinking about the way the shots have to sequence in themselves to bring me believably into the film to make these events work within a coherent amount of space was this sequence. Because it effectively, the voiceover explained that Steve Martin was going to Japan and then underneath something was happening. And then it cuts to the Honda footage. And then it cuts back. So we knew now that he's flying above this incident. And we can sit back in 2026 and know, oh, he's actually flying into the Honda now. But Western audiences did not know that because they had never seen the Honda film. So again, it's these little tricks that when we can set that and we know, oh, this is actually editing. There's all these little moments that actually these films are complementing the mirror.
Do you want to bring a brick and mortar video store back to Minneapolis? The Video Store Minneapolis is trying to do just that. They are a volunteer-run nonprofit with a mission to preserve physical copies of every movie and TV series they can find, create a library of those titles, and make that library available to the people in their community. In the before times, a place like this was called a video store. And it's time to make one real again. The Video Store Minneapolis' 30-day online fundraiser for a brick-and-mortar space launches August 1st, 2026. Give if you can. Go to the Video Store, MPLS.org for more. Oh, before I forget, at the end of this panelist segment, I will be including an old episode from season 1 of Camp Kaiju where it was just me talking about these movies to the void, but it's about 30 minutes of me giving my personal take on Godzilla King of the Monsters. So enjoy a little blast from the past.
Okay, and this leads me to my second part of when we isolate this footage and we center it within our analysis. Doing our research question of what is being added to this film? How does Godzilla become King of the Monsters? How is this an active making process? Going through this footage as well reveals something really important to connecting 1950s audiences. And that's the idea of film intertextuality. And I'm going to watch Joseph as well, but this is a pretty big idea. So it refers to how movies and media borrow, reference, or perhaps with other texts to create the meaning of a nostalgia and enrich the storytelling. Okay, basically nothing exists without them. Nothing exists in a vacuum, especially by the 1950s. So how is this stuff being borrowed to make the audiences immediately connect with it, pick it up, and keep themselves engaged in the films? There's a few types of this intertextuality, and implicit, explicit, illusion, homage, but I'm really going to be talking about one type that, after going through this, I think is absolutely implicit, but until you put this together within these cookies, you don't see it. So hopefully you will see it. This was across my thesis. Please stay with me. I always have lost everybody. Okay. This film is a meta-narrative about how Steve Martin is watching these things. But what's the other biggest film that's a meta-narrative about looking through things that also came out 1 year before? And that's Rear Window. So, what famous scene did you have in Godzilla King of the Monsters? We have Ravenberg looking out that window and emotionally reporting on what he's seeing. So, this scene on the left of Godzilla King of the Monsters, it's not SRS. Because that can be conversation. So what this actually is be considering looking cues. So what it means is that the audience, I know what they're looking at. It's not a conversation, but I can see Raven viewing out. Then I see the shot of what he's looking at, and then it goes back. So this is how film editing is constructing the point of view. So we have this climactic scene in King of the Monsters, and that's really bringing us in. What Rear Window does the same setup of these look cues. So we look at James Stewart and they place these scenes right next to each other. We both have these men doing these very tailored, little cute sequences that are also giving us information. You know, James Stewart is seeing the murderous neighbor and getting clues like that. But we know it's James Stewart through everything from the way they shot him and stuffed him in the binoculars. And the same thing is happening when that's not King of the Monsters. I mean, we have the record, we have all of this, and it's clean from this real time, which is kind of amazing. And you put it right next to each other, and it's like, wow, these are actually edited very, very similarly. And again, this is all editing. This is all film editing. This is all invisible hand that makes this happen. And so when we break it out again a little bit more, so I would call the bottom shots the emblematic shots, or maybe later I'll consider it more of an after image. But it's the shot that your mind remembers. It is that big climactic moment. And then for us with Godzilla, it is Godzilla rampaging the city. What is that scene that all remember? And it's these. But Romero is also constructing it the same way, because what are these scenes? It's also Raymond Burr being monstrous as we're watching him do this. So, and I think what's really important about these connections as well, these are both noir, cinematic, everyman characters. These are ambiguous characters that are meant to be audience surrogates that we immediately go ahead and identify with. You know, they have these relatable jobs. They suffer with them. We do all of this. So in terms of conjunctive subjectivity, the noir everyman character is also a very common trope in the 1950s. And rarely do you want to consider looking at Raymond Burr in this film as an almost everyman character. The everyman character has to be in these outlandish or outrageous situations so that we can follow them. So it's a tool that Terry Morris is using to make this film really relatable to 1950s audiences. So, okay, yeah, we kind of put it together. There were other films and then I might narrate with it, but we use so much comparison of this film and the HannamThe film, and I just think it's bad records. That's why I think we should almost put it next to Rear Window, where we really see how these meta narratives about being put together. And then, but it is effective. I mean, here's my last point about Suture. So Suture also, I'm talking about it within one film, but within a franchise, it can also connect time and space. Okay, so say something like Godzilla, that is the same character doing it to bring us right back. Suture can go back by narrative, which is why in 1985, this scene where he comes back, where we know exactly where this happens, and that's back the window. We are back at that emblematic shot because we have now been sutured back in through the way the editing is to bring us right back here. I mean, all of us watch this and we know exactly what time and space we're supposed to be at. And again, this is all invisible film editing. This is all things that as an audience, this is the post-production that you don't see. So Terry Morris did a really good job if we were able to even bring it back 30 years later in that different goodness. All right. Thank you. That's the film editing part. So now let me bring, it is my honor to discuss the actress who helped make this film possible in the 1950s. And she's a really important character. I mean, so much of this film, we see her. She is interacting with Raymond Burr. We only see her from behind, and every one of her expositions are really important. She's at Dr. Shirazawa's office. She's the one telling us about the oxygen theory and all of that. And up until recently, she was uncredited. We didn't know her name. And now we know her name. And her name is Amy Iwanabe. And we're going to talk about Amy Iwanabe today and how she got to Godzilla King of the Monsters. So Amy Koshima, aka Amy Iwanabe is her married name. She was a dancer. She was trained by the famous choreographer Yoshito Ito. And she performed all of her earlier career, even at the Hollywood Bowl, until she made her way to New York, post-internment camp, dancing at the Hollywood Chinatown Club, before she made her way to Hollywood. And she was an educated dancer and a prolific dancer. That was her trade. So
Yeah, this dancer helped make this film possible. She started her dance training in 1939, and she started headlining the Nisei Week festivals in Los Angeles. That image of Indy is 1938. She's still a late teenager, and you can actually see from that news clipping about 1940, she was a contestant to be the queen of the Nisei pageant. So she was gaining her fame and all of that. But her fame was cut short because Pearl Harbor. I had the honor of speaking with the Iwanabe family. Her son is still alive, and Amy passed away in 2010. And the story that I have from her other recorded interviews that we still have that I have access to, and this is about a third of the materials I have. I am slowly releasing these as I work with the Japanese internment camp projects and all of that. She remembers sitting in a movie theater with a friend and a boyfriend at the time, and the speaker went on and the movie cut out, and it said the Japs had fallen Pearl Harbor. And the whole theater started to turn over, and he had to run out because the mob started to turn on any Japanese people that were in the theater. So she stayed with her boyfriend, Dad. But then the proclamation went out, and Varan family had to go check into the internment camps. First, she went to Santa Ana, where she was connected with her family. At the time, she did marry her boyfriend to have some safety that they would be together in the camps, but they didn't stay together long because then she was sent to Iwanabe internment camp. And there was no running water. There was nothing there. And she had her first baby there. But, all of her interviews, she said that. She taught dance. That was how she got through the internment camp. She taught dance, that they would sneak away into barracks, and they would take moments with music, and she taught dance and ballet to the other people there to pass the time. She was interned for about 3 years. Up until 1945, she was one of the lucky, because generally the internment camps ended in 1946. She got out when she was 5. So she was one of the first people out. But with her release, she ended up going to Chicago, because at the time she had married that guy, which he dies. She gets to Chicago, he dies, and she doesn't know what to do, because she's a trained dancer. So she contacts her sister, who's living in New York, and her sister gets her a job at the famous club on Broadway, and she starts dancing. Amy Iwanabe, within a year, is the headline dancer of the China Doll Club in 1946, and she had a residency there for 3 years. Amy was one of many dancers and many women that went along within these middle 1940s, 1950s period, who ended up being within these dance clubs to kind of make their way post-internment camps. And I have one of her stories about how her mother was a tailor for her costumes. And the mom would yell at her, Amy, you're naked on stage. And Amy would say, Mom, it's a job. I gotta go up there and dance. Yeah, but she was sassy. And I was really lucky to get these candid photos. The one on the left, that's from 1947. That's Amy dancing at the club being the headliner in 1947. So the club promoters decided to change her name. At the time, you could not be Japanese. So first her name was Amy Kwan. But then as she became headliner, the club promoters decided she needed another name to promote exoticism and the fantasy, so they changed her name to Amy Ding Dong. At the time, she said, it was a job. She had to do what she did. Dance was always her vehicle to get through it. And, she just kind of said as long as she kind of kept going, these were these allowances with her identity that had to keep going. But also at this time, there were so many women having to do this. At these clubs, they were Thai, Chinese, Vietnamese, but Western audiences couldn't tell them apart. And these women knew this. So these were these allowances that they had to know to navigate this situation and really get through it and keep thriving. And Amy does, because after this residency, she almost became a voodoo showgirl in 1950, but she was pregnant with that, so she couldn't do that. Which then brings us to her filmography. So then how does this woman then make Godzilla?
The answer to that connection is Jack So, the Asian American actor, because he was in the head of seats at these clubs. So he gets her into Hollywood Comedy Row. She turns off, of course, extra. And she does. These are, through her interviews in the family, this is her filmography. I can't find where she's at in Woman on the Run, so I'm saying it's unconfirmed. She's confirmed in all of these. So let's go through her filmography. Also, in 1952, she does apply for SAG, so we have her Screen Actors Guild cards. So Amy Iwanabe, Amy Ding Dong, she does start to become a hired actor in these films. This was an amazing time. When the family sent me her Screen Actor Guild card, I was like, thank you, that's awesome. All of this is in her house in California that the family is still cleaning out. So every day I'm getting new images. It's really exciting, actually. So let's first start with her first major film, Call Me Mister. She's a chorus girl dancer. And actually in that image, she's sitting right behind Betty Grable. That's Amy Iwanabe, right behind her. And that was one of her first chorus dance roles. Amy is also on the far left there, the big smile standing up. She really said in her interviews that she enjoyed her time with Betty Grable, and actually once Betty was unable to do the costume fitting, and they were the same size. So that costume was actually fitted by her. That's her fittings and her measurements, so she's there. This one was tough, because she said she was in the Golden Cord. Again, she's uncredited in all these films. You're not going to find any, there's no names to any names. It took me about combing this film, shot for shot, to find her. But I found her. Amy Iwanabe is the dancer on the left down, behind also the May Tai Singh, who is another dancer from this period that we're also doing scholarly interventions with, to go ahead and get her included as well, because she was another Vietnamese dancer at the time who was going through these clubs as well. So now that's both of them together, and they're both in this movie with Anne Blythe. And that's a signed card by Anne Blythe to Amy Iwanabe. So we have that connection right there. So she does do other films, but now this brings us to Godzilla, King of the Monsters. And Amy's role in Godzilla, King of the Monsters was the voice and body double of Emiko. We only really see her from behind, but we hear her voice. And she was hired by Terry Morris because she matched Emiko's body and physique, and because she knew Japanese. She was part of the translation team. And what I think is really beautiful about this story is that this is one of the goals where she kind of got to have a more authentic identity. You know, everything else she did, she kind of had to negotiate these westernized, orientalized, sexualized roles. But here, she could actually kind of be this modern Nisai woman within this moment. But it's almost ironic because we never saw her face and we never got her lineage, and she never credited up until now. You know, this moment where she's going to be a more authentic person and in a role that I think maybe has a little bit more respect for the person that she was. But she's also not being a dancer, which is what she loved to do. All of her interviews with Denise Uehara and Lisa C, because they do these books on them that I'm getting someone more of this information on, all Amy ever talked about was dancing. And when I talk to her family, all they ever tell me is, my mom loved to dance. If you're going to talk about my mom, talk about my mom's dancing. She loved to dance. So, in coordination with the Kaiju members, I just want to speak on behalf of the Iwanabe family and say thank you, and say that Amy and I love to dance. And this is parting from her interview with an essay done by her niece for her program at UCLA that was never published, that I got. And when she was looking back on her life in 2005, you know, this was 5 years before she died. She died in 2010. So the family knew that she had done this, but they never went out for reparations. She never went out for credit. It was just something that the family knew and were proud of. You know, she says, I don't regret anything, resent anything, because everything is perfect. I look back and think I enjoyed my life in spite of what I was doing. And I just think that's beautiful. I get a little teary because I wrote this as the birthright citizenship case was happening in the Supreme Court.
And I have so much of her personal stories that I'm protecting from the internment camp because we just don't need to get into it right now. And I was writing this and I just thought, if I'm writing this and then they overturn this and we go back, well, she was one of these people, you know? And, but no, I was able to release it. They upheld birthright citizenship because this does affect people like her. And I think I'm just going to kind of end on that note. But that's Amy Iwanabe. She's a lost actress. I will be slowly releasing more information on her. And she loved to dance. Thank you. It's personal. It's really personal research for me. We're at 52 minutes.
52 minutes?
Any questions?
Any questions?
I'm doing some more images that I will share. Please, people want to see them on a drive. I just don't have them projected out right now.
Being uncredited, how did you link Amy to Monster?
Back channels, and interviews and connections. You know, unfortunately, there's so many of these people in these moments. You're never going to have that gotcha evidence because it doesn't exist. I mean, even the information in the background that you have in the film doesn't exist, which is why I first reached out to see Ryan and IndianaG-Fest because they're really the experts on this. Because I had reached a dead end and I thought, where else am I going to go? I just can't find things. They don't exist. I reached out to the American Film Archive. It doesn't exist. These things just don't exist, and now what we have evidence has to be these interviews with the first-hand people who went through. And, you know, I got a little bit of criticism of like, well, it's not concrete. And I'm like, nothing's going to be concrete and perfect. But they're not asking for anything. They're not asking for anything. They're not even asking to be included in the Godzilla franchise. All they want the world to know that their mom is dance. So why would this not? You know what I mean? Like, what's the harm here? But I talked to Steve Reifel, and within the new book coming out, Amy Iwanabe will be credited. Her name will be credited.
Some other
people are coming.
cool cats are going to be at Days in the Kaiju panel at 3 o'clock.
How did that go? I totally won it. I have no idea what I just said.
That was fantastic.
In 1956, he first appeared on motion picture screens across the country. His impact on audiences was instantaneous and unprecedented. His acting technique was revolutionary. His presence overwhelming. He possessed more raw talent than any performer of his generation. He soon became an international legend, a giant who took the world by storm. Then, suddenly, at the height of his fame, he retired from motion pictures. Now, he is back, and he's more magnificent, more glamorous, more devastating than ever. Prepare yourself. The greatest star of all has returned. Godzilla 1985. Coming soon to a theater near you.
When modern Navy scientists defy the unknown mysteries of the past, perpetuated by centuries of native belief, then nature strikes in all its vengeance in Varan, the unbelievable. For generations, the legend was passed on. They said Varan was there, deep in the still waters. They said, let Varan sleep.
That lake water's going to be contaminated after we finish the tests. It'll probably affect the fish, too. We just can't take any chances.
But those people have depended on their lake for their livelihood all their lives, and their parents before them.
Anna, now should we be this concerned about a handful of people when we might perfect something that could benefit all mankind?
All right, Jim.
But the Navy commander would not heed their warning. He moved forward, ever searching, ever probing, deeper and deeper, until it was too late. Varan rose from the depths slowly, unrelentingly, to wreak its vengeance on a civilization that wanted to know too much. Tumultuous, terrifying. So awesome it will shock you to the core. Varan, the unbelievable.
This is the scene of the crime. A crime of passion, filmed in a way you have never seen before, and as no one else would dare attempt. But the screen's master of suspense, the producer-director who shocked the world with Psycho. This is the apartment of a man named Jeffries, a news photographer whose beat used to be the world. Right now, his world has shrunk down to the size of this window. He's been watching the people across the way. Nobody seems to pull their blinds during a hot spell like this. He knows a lot about them by now. Too much, perhaps. For instance, down there on the second floor, the woman pacing about. He calls her Miss Lonely Hearts. So lonely that even death seems like a friend. These are the newlyweds on a honeymoon no one will ever forget. He calls her Miss Hearing Aid, an artist of a very odd and strange art. The songwriter who plays the same melody over and over again. A genius or insane? This is the traveling salesman and his invalid wife. Out of their arguments and nagging comes a weird kind of love. Miss Torso, the body beautiful. That is, viewed from a safe distance.
Those are just a few of my neighbors. First I watched them just to kill time, but then I couldn't take my eyes off them, just as you won't be able to.
And you won't be able to take your eyes off the glowing beauty of Grace Kelly, who shares the heart and curiosity of James Stewart in this story of a romance shadowed by the terror of a horrifying secret.
Hello, Kaiju campers, and welcome to Camp Kaiju Monster Movie Talk. I am your host, Vincent. I am so excited to be coming at you again. Going to be talking about, I almost said where it all started, but that's not exactly true. Anyways, this is Godzilla, King of the Monsters from 1956, directed by Ishiro Honda and Terry O. Morse. The movie is a reworking, maybe is a generous word for it, version of Honda's 1954 Gojira movie from Toho Studios. So I'll get into a little bit of the history on the Japanese, the American cut, and what all that good stuff is about. Hey, thanks for coming in. I'm going to be talking about Godzilla 1956. I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, and the downright campy elements of this movie as I saw it. I'm also going to cover some of the contextual history of the movie, the time in which it was made, some of the creators, both in front of and behind the camera, and, maybe wrap this up in maybe 30 minutes or less. So, looking forward to it. So let's dive on in. So like I said, the movie is directed ostensibly, Ishiro Honda directed the 1954 version. Between then and 1956, the success it had in Japan was noticed by some American Hollywood producers. And they said, hey, let's kind of get in on the action a little bit. And the director of this movie was named Terry O. Morse. And he was actually really known in Hollywood as an editor. Had been working since the 1920s. He had a great reputation as a film doctor. So not necessarily changing the bones of the movie, but changing all the other things like re-editing, inserting scenes, shooting new scenes in order to make, not Godzilla, but to make any run-of-the-mill B picture into something slightly more elevated. So Morse knew what he was doing with Godzilla. Fortunately for him, he had a lot to work with and didn't have to change a whole lot. So the actors for the movie, their names are Takashi Shimura. He plays Dr. Yamane. Momoko Koshi as Emiko. And Akira Takarada as Ogata. With them, we have Akihiko Hirata as Dr. Sarazawa. And they were in the 54 picture. What makes the 56 version really interesting, so Morse and these producers, what they did was they added an entirely new character to the 54 version. So, yeah, stop me if you're like 54, 56, what are you talking about? But I'm trying to go easy on you. So Raymond Burr is a Canadian actor, and he is playing a whole new made-up character named Steve Martin. He's an American reporter who goes to Tokyo to visit some friends, and while there, he gets caught up in this story of the century, a giant radioactive dinosaur that's running amok in the ocean. So he's a very interesting character, and he is played by Raymond Burr, who at the time was known for gangster movies, and he had just played the antagonist in Rear Window, the Alfred Hitchcock movie with James Stewart. So Burr was actually a pretty well-known actor, in his day. And that's one of the, again, something I'll touch on when I get to like what I really like about this movie. So that's the cast and the crew. Effects are by Eiji Tsuburaya, and what inspired this movie obviously was the atomic history that Japan had recently suffered at the end of World War II, which was 1945. Godzilla, 1954, was released 9 years later. So the horrific memories of 2 atomic bomb attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, still very fresh in the minds of Japanese citizens and the filmmakers behind the movie. What had happened even more recently, to the movie was it's an incident that I mentioned in my Mothra video, and anyone who's a student of Kaiju movies would be familiar with the name Lucky Dragon number 5. It was the name of a tuna fishing boat. 23 Japanese fishermen were out in the Pacific doing their job, living their lives, and they and their vessel got caught in the fallout of a hydrogen bomb test that had a bomb that had gone off 86 miles away at Bikini Atoll. And that was the Castle Bravo test. Now this bomb was so big, it was twice as powerful as the scientists expected it to be. So, they had communicated, the American researchers had communicated to vessels in the area, we have a clearly designated danger zone. Don't come within that danger zone. But because the bomb was bigger than they thought, that danger zone was completely erroneous. And the Lucky Dragon number 5 was, in fact, caught up in the fallout of that bomb. 23 men, after 2 weeks, they got back to shore, very sick, acute radiation poisoning. One of them ended up dying. To this day is still credited as the first victim of the hydrogen bomb. So Godzilla and science fiction history aside, just real world history, that's compelling enough. And so that honestly had happened in March of 54. November of 54, Gojira is released to Japanese audiences, just domestically in Japan. In that movie, the tone is very somber, it's very poignant. It plays as, well, obviously a horror movie, but a very dramatic reflection on the Japanese history with atomic testing. that had unfortunately been the case now for just about a decade. It's a success in Japan. Like I said, good old Hollywood producers, they seize on the success and they decide to rework it and do some dubbing, insert new scenes, this and that. And I'm not going to get into what's right or wrong about that. I am certainly not a gatekeeper by any means. Like, if you have problems with that, they're valid. Dubbing over a foreign film and reworking someone else's artistic license, absolutely valid arguments. What I'm going to do is just kind of put it into a cultural, historical context, and we'll do with that information as we will. So I'm not here to lay down the law on what's right or wrong. I'm just going to tell you how it happened and why it happened. So to that end, Godzilla was not a foreign concept to American audiences in the sense that, it's a monster that's been enlarged by radiation and atomic testing. So bear in mind, another influence on the filmmakers, the Japanese filmmakers, was The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, a giant monster movie from 1953 that's about a giant lizard that gets woken up by atomic testing. We had Them in 1954 about giant irradiated ants, and Tarantula in 55. I could go on and on about the atomic giant monster subgenre of the 1950s. Godzilla was in this wheelhouse. So, that concept was something American audiences were very used to. What they were not used to were just foreign films in general. And that was the decision the producers made to, make it more American and sanitize it a little bit, just to make it more digestible for American audiences. I would say I'm glad they did that, because this movie ended up becoming an enormous success. I'll get to that at the end. I don't need to tell you how successful Godzilla is, right? What I do want to tell you is the synopsis for this film. Just to, in a nutshell, spoiler warnings if you're not familiar, but I would like to give you a backdrop of what I'm talking about when I get to my more in-depth review later on. So, this is just from Wikipedia. I would like in future installments to write my own synopsis. I was just pressed for time a little bit this week, so I hope you can forgive me there. Here we go. So, injured American reporter Steve Martin is brought from the ruins of Tokyo to a hospital filled with maimed and wounded citizens. A recent acquaintance, Emiko, discovers him by chance among the victims and attempts to find a doctor for him. Martin recalls in a flashback stopping over in Tokyo, where a series of inexplicable offshore ship disasters catches his attention. When a victim of those disasters washes up on Odo Island, Martin flies there for the story, along with the security officer Tomo Iwanabe. There he learns of the island's inhabitants' long-held belief in a sea monster god known as Godzilla, which they believe caused the ship disasters. That night, a heavy storm strikes the island, destroying houses and killing some villagers. The islanders believe that Godzilla was actually responsible for the destruction. So right there, in that first sentence, you see that the film starts with a flash forward, if you will. Like Steve Martin is in the rubble. You're like, what's happened to him? Well, he'll tell you in a flashback through a series of narration. I also want to point out that the film starts with the sinking of a Japanese vessel in the ocean. You now know the Lucky Dragon number 5 incident happened within that same calendar year of making the movie. So the creators, Ishiro Honda, knew what notes they were playing. So anyway, Steve Martin returns to the island with Dr. Yamane, who is leading a team to investigate the damage. Huge radioactive footprints and prehistoric trilobites are discovered. An alarm rings and Martin, the villagers, and Dr. Yamane's team head up a hill for safety, Near the summit, they encounter Godzilla, and they quickly flee downhill. Upon Dr. Yamani's later return to Tokyo, he deduces that Godzilla is 400 feet tall and was resurrected by the repeated hydrogen bomb testing in the Pacific. To Yamani's dismay, the military responds by attempting to kill the monster using depth charges. Martin contacts his old friend, Dr. Serizawa, for dinner, but Serizawa declines due to a previous commitment with his fiancée, Emiko, Dr. Yamani's daughter. So there's a bit of a love triangle here. Emiko is engaged to Serizawa, but she's in love with Ogata, who we haven't got to yet. So now we've seen Godzilla. There are giant footprints in the sand. There's a great scene with scientists and government people showing pictures of what Godzilla might look like. Reminded me of Jurassic Park a little bit with the impressions of the feet. It was very cool effects. So now Emiko goes to Serizawa's home to break off her arranged engagement with him because, here we go, she is actually in love with Hideo Ogata, a salvage ship captain. Dr. Serizawa, however, gives her a demonstration of his secret project, which horrifies her. She is sworn to secrecy and unable to bring herself to break off the engagement. Godzilla then surfaces from Tokyo Bay unharmed by the depth charges and attacks the city, destroying a train before returning to the bay. The next morning, the Japanese Self-Defense Forces, JSDF, supercharges the tall electrical towers along Tokyo's coast to repel the monster. So, this device that Emiko has seen Dr. Serizawa orchestrate is known as the Oxygen Destroyer. You know it, you love it. It is a terrifying contraption of death that releases, it's like a canister, you drop it in salt water, it opens, it releases bubbles that skin the bone and skin everything off of the bones. So Emiko sees this to like a goldfish, and it's horrifying. But it'll come into play later. So Godzilla now resurfaces that night and breaks through the electrical towers and JSDF defense line using his atomic heat ray breath. Martin documents Godzilla's rampage via tape recorder and is injured during the attack. Godzilla returns to the sea and the flashback ends. So now we're in the present time, where we started with the movie. Martin wakes up in the hospital with Emiko and Ogata. Horrified by the destruction, Emiko reveals to them the existence of Dr. Serizawa's oxygen destroyer, which disintegrates oxygen atoms in salt water. Emiko and Ogata go to Dr. Serizawa to convince him to use his powerful weapon on Godzilla, but he initially refuses. After watching a television broadcast showing the nation's continuing plight, Serizawa finally gives in to her pleas. Because he's like one of those scientists who's torn between oh my god, I've invented something that could destroy life. I don't want to use it, but at the same time, people are dying by my not using it. So, great moral quandary there. Classic. So in the finale, a ship takes Ogata, Serizawa, Yamani, Martin, and Emiko to the deepest part of Tokyo Bay. In hard hat diving suits, Ogata and Serizawa are lowered down by lifelines near Godzilla to plant the weapon. Ogata is pulled up, but Serizawa delays his ascent and activates the device. He radios the surface of his success and wishes Emiko and Ogata happiness together. Serizawa cuts his lifelines, taking the secrets of his invention to the grave. Godzilla succumbs to the oxygen destroyer, which dissolves his body in bones. All aboard the ship mourn the loss of Dr. Serizawa. Martin reflects that the world can live again due to Serizawa's ultimate sacrifice. And if you'll pardon me for 1 second, those folks listening to the audio podcast version of this are going to love the sounds in my throat. So there you have it. Now, what Raymond Burr is doing as the reporter Steve Martin during this whole movie, honestly, is standing on the sidelines, doing what reporters do, just observing, making notes, speaking into a tape recorder. So in that way, it was very easy to insert new scenes of him into this movie, because he's not really doing a lot of physical interacting with the with the actors in the original print of the film. So now I would like to discuss the good, the bad, and the downright campy, as I saw it at least. This is the movie that I grew up watching. I've seen. The original Gojira was not released to Western audiences until 2004 when it was released on DVD. So honestly, this is not just the movie I grew up seeing, it's the movie that the whole world grew up seeing, unless you lived in Japan. So, however, I had not seen it in quite a long time. Honestly, maybe 20 years. So, I rewatched it. I was going in with a load of preconceptions. I was thinking, okay, let's watch the American cut, this American bastardization. Let's watch this white American go in to a Japanese story and tell me what they want to do with their monster. Loaded with preconceptions. So maybe my bar was kind of low. With that said, this film I thought exceeded my expectations. Like I said, Steve Martin as the character, he doesn't do a lot other than sit back and observe. And in that way, any notion I had of like a white savior narrative was completely dispelled. And I was like, oh my God, thank you that the creators and the editors didn't just like completely re-edit it to make the white American like a hero and save the day. He does not. No, Steve Martin, the movie opens with him bloody and in rubble. Like, what the heck just happened? And it ends that way for him. Like, he representing American imperialism in the height of the Cold War is literally stomped on by the Japanese might. I'm not saying that's what the creators went for, but that's what I got out of the movie anyways, and I really dug it. More about Steve Martin and Raymond Burr, who plays him. Again, I was just impressed by the level of commitment to this project. Like, I was just thinking in the terms of like 1950s B movies, giant bug movies, that this movie for American audiences shouldn't have been as good as it is. And first of all, that's a credit to Ishiro Honda. But it's also a credit to Terry Morse and Raymond Burr for committing to making this as damn fine a picture as possible. It could have been schlock. It could have been a terrible recut. It could have been overly dubbed. It could have been like dollar bin material. But it wasn't. They kept so much of Honda's photography. They kept so much. They honestly didn't dub over every Japanese actor. There are scenes between Japanese actors where there's not even subtitles. You're just listening to them speak Japanese. Now, trivia, I know like the Japanese that they're speaking is incoherent. That's because of the American editing, but I didn't know that watching it. And you're just appreciating the fact that they're not dubbed. So that was refreshing. There were just a lot of refreshing things about this movie. And also another bit of fun trivia. Raymond Burr, apparently he filmed all of his scenes in one 24-hour period. That's what he was contractually obligated to do, just for 24 hours. The fact that he went in there and seemingly gave it his all, he does not phone in this performance. He looks scared. He looks very compelling. And as an audience member, I was very engaged with his performance. And his narration, it's a thematic device that worked for me. It gave me a vibe of like, oh, this is like a film noir. You got that rich voiceover. He has a rich voice. Just more things that I thought elevated the movie beyond what it could have been. So I think I covered that pretty well. So then the bad is just comparing it to Honda's work. The for the most part, the editing of the new scenes in the old, seamless. And that's because they had Terry O'Morse, the film doctor. He, like, if I hadn't known beforehand that these films were new and somehow edited in, I would not have noticed. Upon further reflection, you go, oh yeah, those new scenes, the cinematography compared to the Japanese cinematography from the 54 version, black and white differences, but it comes down to the black and white. Like Ishiro Honda's play with light and silhouette, and he's got beautiful like vistas of the city on fire with the silhouette of Godzilla in the background. Look, guys, it's rare that you see a Godzilla movie that takes itself, A, as seriously as this one does, but B, as terrifying as this one is. Like, this is, I would be so bold to say that this movie is a borderline horror film. It is chilling. It is spooky. It is full of dead people. I don't know what else to tell you. And Raymond Burr on the sideline is just like, I am completely helpless in this situation. And that's how you feel. I'm sure that's how people felt when the bombs fell on them. So it's really powerful. Good stuff. Bad stuff. Great filmmaking. Which means finding a really campy thing about this movie was sort of difficult. You have to come up with something, right? But everyone is so sweaty in this movie. Like, anytime they are looking at Godzilla, just glistening. Anytime our lovers are like in passionate angst, glistening. There's just everyone, whoever like the makeup artist was with dabbing the sweat on their faces. Good job. Unsung hero of this film. So, all in all, my ultimate rating, I'm going to give Godzilla King of the Monsters 1956 a classic rating. I believe it stands the test of time. I'm not going to outright compare it to the 1954 original, because as I see it, they are two sides of the same coin, apples and oranges. If you watch 1954, you're going to get a more somber reflection on the horrors of the atomic age. If you go with the 1956 version, you're still going to get those themes of atomic fear, but they're going to be more subtextual. And what you're going to get is more of that American type of action movie that, I mean, I don't know if you could tell, I like those movies. I think that's something that makes American films unique. So it works. Both work. Both are great times. It's just depending on what you're looking for. But for the 1956 version, I think it stands the test of time. So that's it, guys. I really appreciate you hanging out. I want to just plug a few things. I want to say that please follow and engage with Camp Kaiju on Instagram and Letterboxd. You can buy this t-shirt and some other t-shirts on our through our partner Bandits Emporium. The link for that is in the bio. So do yourself a favor and check those out. I'll also give you an inside scoop that I have started a podcast version of this show. So if you don't want to watch my dumb face every week, you can follow wherever you podcast and just listen on your own time, in your own convenience. And what else? I think that's it. Next week I'm going to talk about a movie I've never seen. I'm going to, the same theme of the classic Toho movies. I'm going to cover Frankenstein Conquers the World. I think it's about time I give this puppy a ride. So join me next week for that. And until then, take care and stay campy. Yeah, there you go. All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you, listeners, for hanging out with us. If you liked what you heard, please give us a rating and a review. Follow us on patreon.com/campkaiju.
Email us, Instagram, you know where to go, and know that you can drop us a voicemail at the answering machine zone, 612-470-2612. Camp Kaiju is recorded in Minneapolis, St. Paul, with Meanie's Mailbox by Ben Cook Feltz. Thank you, friends, and until next time, stay campy.
How did that go? I totally won it. I have no idea what I just said.
That was fantastic.